Hey everybody, Coach Robert here. So today we're going to learn about something that is a very powerful tool in chess. It is called a fork. Okay, now when we talk about a fork, we're not talking about that thing you stab your food with and put in your mouth. We're talking about a tactic. And, just like other tactics in chess, it tends to be named after a pointy object, like a skewer or a pen. But today we're talking about forks. So a fork is where you have one piece that you move and attacks two pieces of your opponents at the same time, and they can't save both. They can save one or they can save the other, but they can't save both. All right, so that's the key idea of a fork is two pieces attacked and they can't save both of them. It's not just attacking pieces, but it's attacking pieces in a way they have to lose some. That's going to give you a really good advantage if you're winning pieces this way. Now, it's really cool because every single piece that you have has the ability to fork. Even the king can fork pieces. Even pawns can fork pieces. And so we're going to see how those work. Now, something else to keep in mind when you are trying to look for a fork is you can't use one piece to fork a piece of the same type. So, for example, if I'm using a knight, I can fork a rook and a bishop. But I can't fork a rook and a knight, because if my knight can attack their knight, that means their knight can attack my knight. So forks only work when you're using one piece to attack two different types of pieces. All right, so we're going to start in with the knight here, looking at this one, because this one has so many different ways it can fork. It's the one that can really surprise your opponent. The idea is that a knight has 8 squares it can move to from the middle of the board, and if your opponent has pieces sitting on any of the 2 of those squares, you can attack them. So let's remind ourselves where the knight moves. You've got the circle of squares right around the knight, which would be where a king can move, right around here. But if you go to the second ring and you look at all the squares that are a different color than what the knight sits on, that's where the knight can move. So the knight's on the light square. You go to the second ring and it can move to any one of the dark squares on the second ring out. Okay, that means if my opponent had pieces that were aligned kind of next to each other but had one square in between, I could fork those pieces. Or maybe they're adjacent to each other diagonally. I could fork those. Now, or they could be lined up but with 3 separating them. I could fork those. Now that's interesting because if you remember, the black pieces start with the king and the rook. Forkable. If you can get a knight protected to the c7 spot. Also, the queen starts on d8 and a rook starts on h8, and you can fork the queen and the rook if you can get a knight protected to f7. So it's really useful to know. One of the most interesting patterns is this kind of long L shape, right? It's kind of like a knight that went a little bit too far. When pieces are in that position, a knight can fork those as well. And so it just has to jump to the square that attacks both squares at once. Now, if you want to fork, let's say we've got a rook here and a rook here. Let's see, let's drop that rook right there. A bishop sitting on g7 could fork the rooks on b8 and h8 by moving to the diagonal that the 2 rooks are on. Right? By moving this bishop over to here. That's going to fork the 2 rooks. All right. Well, what about maybe we've got a bishop sitting here and a knight sitting here. We got a bishop on b7 and a knight on h7. What piece do you think we could use to fork these? Well, if you said rook or queen, you'd be right. So if I had a rook, I could move that rook up to perhaps f7 and it would attack both pieces at once. Or a queen, let's see if we can put this queen somewhere nifty where it can actually attack both at once. So, oops, let's put that rook right back. Let's put the queen right here. All right, did you know there are 2 spots the queen can move to fork these pieces? The queen can move to here, just like the rook could, but the queen could also move right here, or she could move right here. All three, C2, H2, and F7 are all squares that attack both the knight and the bishop. All right, so we said that a king can fork. This is really useful towards the end of the game. Let's say you've got a knight and a bishop sitting next to each other. Let's get that bishop on the board. If the king is close enough, say right here, we got the king on d4, the knight on d6, and the bishop on e6. The king can step up and attack both the knight and the bishop at the same time. And there's no move that the knight or the bishop could make to protect both pieces. All right, so it's one of them's going to lose. As long as they're not protected, they cannot defend both. Now pawns can be pretty sneaky because, you know, they don't move and attack the same way. So let's say you're kind of early on in the game and maybe your opponent has a knight and a bishop that have gotten a little bit advanced, and we're going to put that bishop right here, and you've got this pawn still sitting on d2. You can, as long as, and remember, if you've got a pawn on d2, that means you probably have the queen sitting behind it, right? So that pawn can hop up there and attack both the knight and the bishop at the same time. A double attack, a fork, whatever you want to call it. If the bishop takes the pawn, then the queen just takes the bishop. They're gonna lose a piece, right? So this is what forks are all about. Finding a way to attack two pieces at once where your opponent can't save both. All right, so let's take a look at some actual positions that either came up in a game or they were about to come up in a game and the one player resigned because they realized, oh no, I'm about to get forked, I'm about to lose some stuff. All right, let's start with this one. It is black's turn to move. See if you can pause the video and see if you can find the fork that black has right here, okay? All right, did you find it? Hopefully this one was pretty easy for you because we just looked at pawns. Black only has pawns. There's only one move black has that can attack two pieces at once, and that would be moving that pawn forward, putting the king in check, and attacking the rook. So when you do that, the king has to respond. The king has to back away, leaving the rook free to take. The king could come over to d3 and capture the pawn back, but honestly, rook is worth 5, pawn's worth 1. I'm definitely taking the rook and letting you have my pawn, all right? And then my king can move around and maybe get this e-pawn turned into a queen. All right, so hopefully you saw that one. Let's take a look at another one. Okay, so this one, it's white's turn to move. Black just captured the white rook on d5. That was the last move. Black just captured a white rook, and now white is down material. Why did white let black capture that rook? See if you can, go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find the fork that white set up. Okay, did you find it? All right, this one probably is easy too. The bishop can go from d3 to e4, and when it does that, it not only puts the king in check, but also attacks the black rook. So when that happens and black moves around to get his king to safety, the rook falls. And the king has to decide, do I want to chase down this pawn over here on the h-file and let white take the c-pawn, or do I want to keep and try to protect the c-pawn and let white march the h-pawn down to queen and victory? Okay, those weren't too bad, were they? Let's see about another one. Okay, there's some more pieces on the board here. This one, it might be a little trickier. It's white's turn to move. So pause the video, see if you can find the fork in this position. All right. All right, so just to give you an idea of what's happened to lead up to this, white sacrificed a bishop on d5, letting the pawn capture, and then moved the white queen up to attack the rook. And the white queen moved, or the black queen moved over to protect it. This gives white an opportunity for a fork. Did you find it? We got a few pieces on the board. All right, You might have thought, well, this knight could come over here, right? And take the pawn. That forks the queen and the bishop. Yeah, but the queen could just move and be able to protect the bishop and the rook still. And then the knight, you can trade the knight for the bishop, but you don't win anything. So, all right, so that's not going to be it. Uh-oh, that was not it. Oh, it showed it to you, didn't it? Right there, rook to e8, attacking both the king and the queen at the same time. And even if the queen takes the rook, the queen was protecting it, and so the black queen is going to fall. There's nothing that black can do to save his queen. All right, one more. See how you do with this one. All right, another one. There's lots of pieces on the board, lots of chances to attack, lots of moves you can make, but there's one that's a really good fork that's going to really help black finish this game. So see if you can spot the fork that black now has available. All right, pause your video, check it out. Unpause when you think you found it. Okay, hopefully you saw the correct move. There, like I said, there are a lot of things. We can take this bishop, we could take this bishop, but neither of those really give us an advantage. It's just a trade. The right move is knight to e4, right? Now the knight is attacking the king and the queen at the same time. Can't save both of them. You got to get out of check. You got to move. There's nothing that can capture the knight, so the king has to move, and then the knight is taking the queen. Even if the knight is lost after that, I would give up a knight for a queen any day. Okay, so hopefully you're getting the idea. You've practiced some forks. Start looking for these ideas in a game where you see your opponent has two pieces that are situated so that they could be forked, and see if you can pull that off. Sometimes you can get out of a fork by counterattacking, using one of your pieces that was forked and attacking back, maybe putting your opponent back in check or attacking their queen. So look for those. Make sure your opponent doesn't have a way out. If they do have a way out, then what you should do is see if you can force them to move a piece so they don't have their way out anymore. And that way you can set up those forks, get the material, and go on to win the game with the extra material that you have. All right, I hope this was helpful. Get some practice, and I'll see you in the next video.